Hasan Piker cannot China. We're going to get into today on The Legal Mindset. We teach you to be your own judge. Of course, I'm Andrew Esquire, American attorney living in Asia, actually living in Asia. And we're going to talk about Hasan's near arrest in China and the legal reasons and practical reasons why he will never relocate there or could never relocate there and actually operate as a streamer doing what he does in America. Now, this is something of both legal and personal interest to me as someone living abroad. I've lived abroad for 6 going on 7 years now. And as someone looking at this, a LARP that he is doing in China, which is something that a lot of influencers are doing nowadays. They are oftentimes paid by the state or the provincial government to actually take these tours and trips. And seeing that even on this trip, which is carefully guided, carefully manicured, super pro propaganda, even during this trip, he makes a slip up, he makes a mistake, and it shows you how American streamers can really only do what they're doing from America. So we're going to get into that today on the show. Of course, I've got a PP for you, a PowerPoint, why Hasan cannot China. So, of course, this involves our favorite streamer, Hasan Piker, who has had no small deal in terms of his recent controversies. Collargate not going anywhere anytime soon. Those memes will last forever on the internet. But this isn't about Collargate. We're indeed moving on a little bit farther east. Now, here we see Hasan Piker in an interaction with Chinese police. So what happened was he made a meme. There was a meme of Hasan that was propagated involving him as Mao Zedong. And obviously, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, does not take too kindly to the memes. They are not a people of the memes. They don't have the same meme culture as America. And indeed, memes can get you in big trouble if they offend the state. So in fact, during this interaction with police, this was taken offline. His stream was taken offline for a while as he was lectured by police on what not to do and to do. Obviously, he crossed a line there. And think about this. This is a person that is not living there, that is literally there as a spoiled Nepo baby on a likely state-sponsored tour, going around seeing very carefully manicured, guided things. And even during that, he managed to have an altercation with police. Even during the few days he is in China, he has an interaction with police. So we're going to get into it from the perspective of someone like myself who actually knows a lot about China and the people in China, the culture in China, the laws in China. And we're going to talk about why he will never actually be there. Because things like this would not just happen once, but would quickly land him likely either detained and just disappeared for a while or deported from the country very, very quickly. And part of that is his Islamist support. And this is something that people don't recognize in America because oftentimes Hasan gets away with the very simplistic analysis of America and the West are bad, everybody else good. And while that can work for 39 IQ people in the United States who want to follow Hasan Piker and just go rah, rah, America bad, over here in Asia, geopolitics is a little bit more complicated than a pea-brain like Hasan can actually comprehend. In fact, the relationships in between countries are very, very complicated. For example, Hasan has strong support for Pakistan, and especially involving the Kashmir issue, strong support for that, strong support for the Islamist movements there. And in fact, he went on record here saying, and I'll make this even more clear, talking about India, they've been doing this for 30 years. We have to get blood. Now, in America, we've talked about statements regarding to Charlie Kirk that likely can get people potentially put in jail, or at the very least reported under OSHA legally and get them ejected from their jobs with no issue there. It's even worse in China. If you think that that is a bad thing in America and you think getting fired from your job over saying someone should be assassinated is too far and that's something you think is extreme, well, guess what? In China, the rules are even stricter and companies are far more stringent on what you say on social media than over here. And one of the things that people don't realize is, yes, while you can say America bad, America, West bad, everybody else good over in America, when you move over to China, things and generally in Asia, things are more complicated. There are countries that have anonymity toward each other, even complex relationships, but yet still need to maintain a social face, right? A public appearance of amiable of an amiable relationship, right? Saying, hey, we get along here. We're going to do business, even if we have some beefs, even if we have some disagreements, even if we take different tracks, we're still going to remain friendly and amiable. And this is something that Hasan simply cannot do. He simply cannot do an analysis deeper than these people are fundamentally evil and they're wrong and everything they do is bad. And well, these people are good. That analysis doesn't work in Asia and certainly wouldn't work in China, whereby India, the largest trading partner of China, you don't want to go out there and necessarily promote that. And beyond that, his broad support of Islamist movements is a problem when you have things like the BLA, the Baluchistan Liberation Army over here. These guys look like they could be Hasan's cousins. So these people are actually out there attacking Chinese nationals. And this is a story from Islamabad in October 7th of 2024. But there were 2 Chinese nationals killed and 1 Chinese national injured with a terrorist attack with some people that perhaps Hasan might be out there supporting. What is he going to do? What is he going to do? Is he going to call his Houthi pirate buddies to like phone in to support these guys? What's going to go on here? Once again, the analysis gets more complicated when Hasan could be seen as supporting people that are counter to Chinese national interests. These sorts of things can get you in trouble when you're over here legally and can land you, if not arrested, at least disappeared for a while. So when I talk about moving to China, here's another thing that I talk about, because I've talked about a lot of people, and a lot of people contact me about moving to Asia, which is a great thing. But one thing as a long-term resident, and remember, tourism, Hasan LARPing and visiting for a couple days, that's not living somewhere, that's not understanding the culture, that's not actually getting to know real people. He's seeing the fake, cherry-on-top version of the country. Now, let me be very clear. There are some positives about China. There's a lot of negatives, but there's positives as well. Every country has its positives and negatives. But tourism and going there and LARPing as if you're some geopolitical expert because you did a 5-day field trip is not actual deep knowledge of the country. And what you have to know if you have deep knowledge of the country is you need a visa to live somewhere abroad. You can't just move to China and just say, hey, I'm moving to China, and they just let you in. That's not how things work over here down east. What you need is a visa long-term, and his most viable option will be a Z visa, which is the best option if you're trying to be a content creator. But the problem with that is you either need to have a sponsor or you need to set up a wholly owned foreign enterprise, which is acronymed as WFOE. Now, while he does have the money to set up his own company, at the end of the day, these things are all signed off by the state, which carefully monitors what you're doing with these entities. It's not like America. It's not like Dan Clancy, who's going to give you a pass on everything and quickly move to make excuses for your bad behavior and your potentially illegal behavior, right? We're looking at you, the collar incident, right? We're not just going to look past that legally. They are going to take quick and swift action. And one perception, and this applies to China, but also Asia more broadly, is thinking that they're weak on crime or weak on laws. Quite the contrary. One of the reasons for the safety levels in China and other countries is because they're quite strict, especially when it comes to working and living there. When you live in a country, you are under a microscope legally, and that is tied to your immigration status and your status in that country. So if you're doing something that violates the norms of that country, they are under every single right and every single ability to remove you from that country. So supporting these movements and taking an aggressive anti-India stance is definitely going to be problematic for him if he goes and tries to move over to China, which once again, I don't think he's going to actually do that, but let's just hypothetical this, right? And let's not even mention the Uyghurs, right? So if he wants to even try to bring that up, let's forget about Tibet, Taiwan, everything else that we know you can't talk about, right? You definitely can't talk about that, but how about the Uyghurs? How about your bros out there? How about if, your Houthi brethren want to support the Uyghurs? What are you going to do then? What are you going to do then, Hasan? You really can't do that because legally that's going to become an issue and you're going to get shut down. So ultimately, one of the most funny things to me about watching this experience was this encounter when he talks to these regular Chinese people and they like Asmongold. And to me, this is absolutely gold, chef's kiss, because in this, he's discovering there's a difference between the real average citizen and what the government says. And despite what many people may say, the average citizen in China is actually kind of based. In fact, there's places in China, this is like giga-based, where out in the countryside, they don't even give their wives names. It's wife of farmer X, right? This is not me making this up. This is real China stuff, right? And the average citizen has problems just like we do in America. They're regular people. In fact, they're oftentimes a little bit even more based than Americans in certain socioeconomic issues. So when he spoke to these average citizens and they knew Asmongold and liked Asmongold, why is that such a shocker to him? Because Hasan is a removed Nepo baby who sits in his little bubble in LA and doesn't talk to real people from these countries and interact with them daily, like someone like myself. These people, if you actually speak to them, have the same socioeconomic problems that we do. We've heard of quiet quitting. Well, that came mainly from China with the lying flat movement or let it rot movement. These sorts of things where people are seeing no hope. They're looking at apartments, for example, in Shanghai, where you can't buy an apartment for under essentially $1 million USD. And there's many other places where literally it is impossible for a person working a regular job to buy an apartment or buy a house. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Yes, to Americans. And people like Asmongold who are speaking up on these issues, they can identify with as they're translated into Chinese, as they're translated in other languages, they can identify with this. And that's why it's such a shocker for Hasan when he discovers the reality is different than the propaganda. And that's one of the reasons why I say in conclusion here, the average Chinese citizen and Chinese culture is really too based for Hasan. It is far too based for Hasan. He would not be able to handle it. He would not be able to deal with it long term. It's not all about Gucci stores being right next to street vendors. That's not what it's about. What it's about is a deeper rooted culture and a deeper rooted citizen that's going to tell you directly, that's going to cut through the BS, cut through the games. And, you know, that's a positive about speaking to people who are from China is they're very, very direct. That's too much for Hasan. He can't handle that. He can't handle anybody that goes against him. And certainly his politics would be a impediment to any practical move. These guided tours are just geopolitical LARPs. Every time I see them, it's saying, oh, you touched down in Japan. You spent 5 days there. Congratulations. Do you want a pin? You know, China, do you want a little pin for you been there on your map? That's not actually getting to know a country deeply or understanding the nuances of those cultures. And I think that if Hasan continued to do his streaming, he would quickly be detained. If only for talking about the issues he's talking about, not to mention defamation, which we've talked about is legally different over there. But I want to know what you guys think. Should Hasan move to China? What's going on with that? What do you guys think? And I'll catch you on the next.